So this is In Retrospect with Skimmy, who is primarily at this point in his career a League of Legends caster. But I think in your career within esports, you certainly had a bit of a round trip as far as roles is concerned. You were a pro player at one point. I don't know how long that necessarily lasted for. And even at this point, maybe you're doing a bit of content creation yourself as well. So is that all pretty much everything, or is there like even more to kind of go into?
No, it's a pretty fair wrap up. Yeah, basically tried everything at this point, really apart from production. I think there was definitely one stage when I was casting and I tried to host my own tournament and, sort of similar gig where you're doing the observing, you're doing the slide scene changing and all the rest of it, and it was just overwhelming, right? You're realizing that you're not even able to commentate at that point because you're so focused on making sure that the camera's moving, that you're on the right graphic and so on and so on. So I realized that there's so many moving parts in this machine, and then definitely like having been on a premier product like LCO, you realize that they can certainly shine in that category, right? You've got a good observer, you've got a great graphic team, whatever it may be. It all comes together, right? And then everyone sort of like complements each other very well. So
yeah, I think one of the interesting things about you that I sort of noticed, and even in conversations that we've had since we've known each other, is that like obviously when I first saw you on a broadcast, I thought like you're just like any other guy, right? You are just someone who sort of naturally fits on a broadcast. But in conversations that we've had like over maybe the last year or two, you've sort of indicated to me that you're a bit more of an introvert, and having hung out with you a couple of times, like you're sometimes a little bit difficult to get a hold of and stuff like that. So my first question with that is like, you've always kind of struck me as an outgoing person, but like I said, these conversations have sort of led me to believe the other direction. And it seems like almost a strange career to kind of pick up for someone like that. So how's that? Like, am I reading a bit too much into that? Or?
No, bang on. Yeah, no, definitely from a young age, high school speeches, all the rest of it, any kind of performance, say at drama class at high school, was very nervous about that, very afraid to make a mistake and sort of, embarrass yourself. I'm not sure where that really stemmed from, having sort of explored the subject before. People saying, was that pressure from your parents? Was that sort of an embarrassing moment that's maybe, caused a bit of trauma that you've like hung on to and stuff, and not anything that I can really remind myself of. I just know that, when it came to high school speeches, you'd have all your cue cards, you'd be sat there anxiously sitting there and go, oh, I don't want to do this, and then you'd get up there, you'd whiz through it, and then you quickly realize that everybody else in the classroom is feeling the exact same. And if everybody was like kind of feigning this confidence of like, I can't wait to get this done, it was all this big lie. But when it came to casting, it was a really weird, it wasn't really meant to happen. It was kind of just, I fell into it, right? But the way I described it is like the anxiety of having to talk in front of a crowd, having everybody like rely on what you're saying and making sure that you don't butcher pronunciation or the moment. I think all that kind of anxiety is usually being trumped by the enjoyment. So all the sort of pre-show, all the kind of me sitting there on the couch waiting, all that, I'm feeling very, very tense, very in my own head.
Right.
But as soon as the game starts, I'm there yelling, screaming, shouting. Yeah, just kind of, that all goes to the side for a second. It's almost like the enjoyment trumps any kind of intimidation or any kind of nerves. So it's always been this really weird relationship when people ask you, you are quite an introverted character. You like to keep to yourself, like to recharge those batteries. I say, you're spot on. Yeah,
I mean, the question I have, I guess, in relation to that is like, has it gotten easier? Because obviously now you're quite deep into your career. I don't know how long. I do know how long you've been casting, I guess. But just in terms of, now I would say you've been on LCO for a few years. You had OPL for a year or so. Before that, you were doing Heroes of the Storm and stuff like that. Has it kind of gotten easier? I feel like you're probably 5, 6, 7. Even obviously in terms of just commentary. Further than that, because you were doing some, even you told me at crazy stages like 2010 or something like that. So, it's been a while. Has it gotten easier as you've gone through that journey? And especially, I would say, in the last few years, right? Because in the last few years, you've been obviously doing the majority of your work in studio, or maybe the last year and a half or 2 years. So has that kind of helped? Has that made a bit of a difference?
I would say it comes and goes in waves. I think with the COVID lockdown, it was pretty rough and mental for anybody. Originally was here just on my own. Was living with Carbon and Tess. So that was awesome. That was actually a lifesaver, because otherwise it would have been a very lonely affair to just move to Sydney and then be on my own in solitude lockdown. So having them around was fantastic. But I think just the the aspect of seeing everybody out, enjoying themselves back home in New Zealand, and sort of we're all being stuck in this lockdown, definitely took a bit of a toll. So I think the casting from home, the bedroom casting, excuse me, that was fine. I mean, that's easy, right? You're in your own bedroom, you're okay. But I think once we were back in the studio again, it was a bit intimidating at first. It comes and goes. I think the thing that I always try and remind myself of is that if you're not nervous about something, then you probably don't really have too much. What's the word for it? Like, if you're not nervous, you're not putting as much passion into it, right? There's that degree.
You don't have the investment, maybe?
That's right, yeah. Like, there's that muddied relationship between nerves and excitement, right? Where it's that confusing point of, like, is it just both and you're misinterpreting one?
Yeah.
Right? So, I think somebody told me very early on that, like, if you're not nervous, it's because you don't care about the quality of your work. So I think if I was there to go into it and feel all blasé, here we go, like another day in the job, I feel like you're taking it a little bit too much for granted. So I think there's a degree where you almost need to be nervous, but obviously not to the point of hindrance where you're, you're feeling a bit sick or actually I refuse to go on stage, I can't do this.
Yeah. I have read somewhere, or I saw something somewhere where it was like nerves and excitement are basically the same thing in theory. The same feeling, but it's just based on how you perceive the situation or something like that.
Absolutely.
Now, the last question actually on that before we start going into your career is do you feel like you have a broadcast persona or personality? Like, do you think you're a different person or and not even necessarily that, but do you feel like you're a different version of yourself maybe when you are on a broadcast? Because I know for myself personally and for other casters that I've spoken to, like, I think I'm a little bit more reserved and a bit more chill when I'm not on a broadcast. But when I go on a broadcast, like, there's very much like there's a way that I speak, there's a way that I sit and act and look at people and stuff like that, which I just don't do in normal life. And how I even sort of pose topics or how I have a conversation with someone is very different when I'm on a broadcast, on a recording versus in human sort of normal interactions kind of thing.
I think it depends. I know definitely when I did OPL, I was very reserved because I was new kid on the block. I'm brand new to a game. These guys are all veterans, right? I'm working with like the likes of Spawn and Rusty and so on. So, you're coming in new kid on the block. People are going, who's this guy? So obviously you're very intimidated because this game's been around for umpteen years and you know nothing about it and you're calling out terms that are just completely incorrect. So you're thinking already people are going to be, who's this guy? Get him off.
Yeah.
So definitely I was very reserved than that. I think I came into my own a little bit more, sort of like the imposter syndrome in a way, kind of getting pushed to the side with LCO, right? You do a good job. Maybe a pro player would react well to it, or they post a highlight clip and you're like, this was sick, and you're thinking, oh, cool, like that's good to know. You'd get more familiar with the LCO players themselves, right? Hang out with some of them, play other games with them, and so on. So you'd start to feel not validated, but you'd like. You'd feel a little bit more at ease that you're right to be in this position. It's not as if you've stolen it from somebody that was a better fit per se. So. Definitely in the recent years, I think this has been egged on by the team we've worked with, right? Like, for example, Mac, if Mac's going crazy, I just sort of resonate with that really, really well. So we'll bounce off and be crazy together. I would say I probably add a little bit to the show. Definitely, as you said, I can certainly be very introverted, but if I'm in good company with friends that I know outside of it, I'll be the exact same, right? I'm crazy, loud, energetic, and sort of all the rest. But definitely if I'm in a big group and I'm not too familiar with too many people, I'm quite happy to take a back seat and just sort of vibe in the background, have more, one-on-one conversations. But definitely on the show, I'm keen to do all the cringe stuff, right? Like the oohs and whatnot, anything to try and, get a reaction.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we've ever really consciously mapped this out as a team, right? Like, I know with Rusty, like Rusty will almost like play the fiddle of, I want to be the grumpy man.
Yeah, he's
right?
like the villain kind of
Do you
guy.
know? Yeah. So he'll sort of play the, this is all cringe, what are you doing? And I'll be like, I'm ready to say the ubus and all the rest of it. And then, Mac might be there to bring all the energy and per se. So we never really mapped this out, but it kind of just worked out in that way. And then I guess subconsciously we just said, let's run with it.
Yeah, it's something that I've noticed with some of the teams that I've worked with in the past as well, is that everyone sort of naturally almost fits into a role, and obviously it's very heavily defined by like your personality, and normally you end up seeing like a fairly good mix on a broadcast. So it's sort of nice how it seems to almost always work out, and I guess that's just the nature of the beast, right? Because if it's not working out, that person that's probably making an issue of it or whatever ends up not really working on that broadcast any longer or something like that.
I mean, it just makes it enjoyable, right? Because then it's organic. It's not a case of you're forcing humor or you're trying to make something happen. Like I feel like the audience is definitely a lot smarter than people give them credit for, right? I've always said this about casting as well. Like if I'm doing a game that I don't enjoy, I would imagine that the audience can tell this guy's not doing it for the passion. He's doing it for a paycheck. So I would like to imagine the same can be said when you've got a team of 3, 4, 5 casters on a couch, you can tell that they're actually vibing with each other.
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking of the passion, I guess we should sort of start talking about your career trajectory and the journey that you've gone on, because that's kind of the point of this, is to start from, the beginning and then go all the way to the present day. And the beginning for you, or at least the beginning where we want to start this conversation, was way back in about, 2010, 2009 even, maybe going back there.
Yeah, it's a while later.
You were telling me about some Call of Duty casting that you did. So even in researching this, I've learned a few things about you that I had no idea, because I always thought you kind of started off in Heroes of the Storm, and you sort of naturally transitioned from being a player to a caster to going there. But you told me you were like even trying to be a player in Call of Duty, and then you even casted some Call of Duty. So talk to me a little bit about what Call of Duty was like. I mean, this is really, really old school stuff. This is before like a lot of people in modern day of Australian esports, or even just esports in general, were involved in.
This is old school.
Back then, it was like competitive video gaming, right? Not esports.
It wasn't even esports. No, absolutely. I'd always had a passion for gaming. I mean, it started from a very young age. My dad was big in computers. I actually had my own computer built by him when I want to say like 7 years old. And we sort of had this hierarchy system where dad got a new PC, I'd get his old one, I'd pass my one down to my younger brother and so on. So it was always an exciting time. But it made it enjoyable because, when it came to, primary school projects, high school projects at that young age in England when I was born, you'd have this sort of advantage because it's not the shared family computer. You're figuring out things like you cracked copies of Photoshop, you got LimeWire and all the rest of it. You're thinking, oh, this is quite exciting.
Yep.
So you were like getting this sort of innate feel for like, there's so much potential with this. And then when it came to moving to New Zealand, obviously been a very big football fan in England, right? I was big on sport. Came to New Zealand, had to make a new group of friends, and it just so happened that the friends I made were all big into video games as well. And one of my friends was Korean, whose family actually owned an internet cafe. We'd spend a lot of time after school hanging out there, right? So you're playing your Warcraft 3 custom games, your CS, Source, whatever else it would have been out at the time. So just had this sort of affinity where, after school, it was time to hang out with your friends, and what would have been before me kicking around a football, it'd be now me falling in love more and more with the games and sort of going, it's quite interesting. And I think, I don't know, it's not just like obsessive trait, but I guess in a way it is where, you find something that you enjoy, you've got to be good at it, because at a certain point it changes from you're playing it for fun into I'm playing it because I want to be good.
Yep.
And like, being good at it is now what gives me that sort of enjoyment factor, as opposed to I'm just playing it because it gives me 3 hours to forget about homework or whatever. So yeah, a few years go by. It's like the final years of high school, and Modern Warfare 2 is out, 2009, the original. And a bunch of my friends and I were playing. And then we just sort of stumbled across Cybergamer at the time, which I guess now is what? Let's Play Live?
LPL, yeah.
Yeah. So the original Cybergamer. And we found out they had like an open bracket ladder for that. And we're thinking, let's just have a crack at this. Let's give it a try. And never really amounted to too much, right? I mean, I think we're coming like 4th, 5th and all the rest of it. Be like, this is kind of fun. Like you're getting your head around like what scrims are. And, you're going into... you're going into your public lobbies and you're taking off all your perks, all your attachments, pretending it's scrim culture. So you're almost treating it like it would have been like a high school sport in a way. And then, sort of got a little bit of, you don't want to say fame, but you got a bit of enjoyment out of it, of perhaps, people recognizing you in a lobby going, oh, is that Skimmy? I've seen you in your yada yada. Yeah. And you kind of I think it's like a bit of a dopamine rush, much like it is for teenagers now today on like TikTok and all the rest of it, where it's like, oh, this video got X amount of views. How exciting. And I'm trying to remember how it actually happened where I stumbled into casting, but I know with Modern Warfare 3, they had this like State of Origin, and for whatever reason, I got like, brought onto like Team New Zealand, and I was like, oh, holy crap, it's so cool. It's like the Olympics.
So you were like, yeah, I'm on Team New Zealand.
That's exactly it, right? Like, 17, 18-year-old Skimmy's thinking this is insane. Like, I've made it to the Olympics, bragging to your friends. And one of my friends who was arguably better than me, he didn't make it onto the team. So, you're being young, you're like told, oh, you're not good enough, mate, blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
I remember showing you the screenshot, right? We got absolutely smashed by who was like in New South Wales or somebody, like 13-0, complete stomp. But I'm like, oh yeah, but I top fragged. I'm happy about that, right? Yeah. So it's cool. But yeah, I'm not sure how the casting came about. I think just an expressed interest and like I really enjoy what this is all about. And I know at a young age I was very vocal, so I was always like a shot caller. That carried across into when I was doing Heroes of the Storm. I was like the captain and shot caller for that as well. So maybe just a connection in the right place led me to sort of casting, and I'd hate to listen back to it now because it'd probably be a very young Skimmy with a high pitched voice going, "Oh my god, look at this!"
You know what? I didn't show you when I was doing the research, but I was actually looking back through your Twitter, and I remember seeing a tweet where you said, "Oh, I found like my first cast and you posted a picture which was kind of very, it was just like a Call of Duty leaderboard, like the
Yep.
same one that you showed me about the State of Origin thing. But you didn't actually post the link.
Yes.
If you would have posted the link, I would have like actually brought it up. But
I wish I could have found it, because whilst we were talking, I was literally searching every kind of obscure.
yeah, you go to all the old channels and
Absolutely,
stuff like
the
that.
key phrases for this and that. There's actually another one that's even funnier. We can go back even more years. Do you remember the original Star Wars Battlefront?
Yes.
Yeah, there's actually a video of me playing that, and it's me recording like a strategy as to how to like control these bases. Like, it's basically like a version of domination where you got like capture point
Yep.
A, B, and
Yep,
C.
Yep. You got to control as many as you can.
And I'm like, you
Yeah.
know, Tactics for Death Star by GK
Yeah.
Skimmy, and it's just like a 10-year-old me. So even at a very young age, you can tell that I just had this like fascination
You were a
with
bit of a
gaming.
nerd, yeah.
I was just like, you know, this is exciting. It's competitive.
You know what? I mean, this is a complete tangent and a complete aside, but actually, it's funny that you would talk about Star Wars Battlefront 2, because I don't even know if you know this about me, but the first game that I ever played online was Star Wars Battlefront 2.
Okay.
And that's where I kind of found that scrim culture, and I was like running a clan in Star Wars Battlefront 2, you know,
Yes.
and we were scrimming against the other top clans in Oz, and that was the game where I did my first cast as well. I
Okay.
casted a 2v2 tournament that we had on Coruscant. I think it was Coruscant. Yeah, the Coruscant, like the library.
Yes.
Anyway, whatever. Bit of an aside, but yeah, it's funny how like you don't even think about these games in like hindsight, but like that was actually quite an important part.
Well, that's like back
of
when
my
you
career,
had
and maybe yours too.
X-Fire.
I had
right,
X-Fire
which was
profile.
like your MSN but for gaming.
Yeah.
It's actually how I got into hardstyle as well, because you know, being in this clan, they were all a bunch of Dutch players. This is what confuses me, is these guys would have been like my age or maybe a little bit younger. Why were they like? Why did they let me, a 10-year-old, come play for their team, or 11-year-old, whatever I've been at the time? It feels crazy to me, because like I don't feel like myself at this age now would have the patience to want to hang out with like a 12-year-old playing Fortnite or whatever, right? So. I just find it hilarious to sort of see how things came around.
It was different back then though, because it was like if you were in that space, you were kind of quote unquote hardcore. I use the term
True.
hardcore not in the sense that you would today, but just like by nature of being someone that was on the internet trying to play games online, you were already like a 0.1%.
The accessibility is so different.
But now
back
it's
then.
like you're probably 50% of the population at this point is playing
sure.
Fortnite.
Yeah, for sure. You're
So
right.
anyway, the only other thing that I wanted to sort of touch on in terms of old history was you told me that Cyanide bought you a copy of Black Ops 2 and you did some
Yes.
casting for Team Down TV, which again, I didn't know about because a lot of the casting that I did initially when I first started casting was also with Team Down TV. And a lot of Australian casters, a lot of New Zealand casters have come through Team Down TV. So was it semi-influential in your career? I mean, casting for Team Down TV, and I know you also did a lot of GameStar stuff as well, but that I think sort of came later on.
Came a little bit later, yeah.
Heroes. So those were like the two big production companies. They weren't companies. They were just people doing it. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
those were like the big ones back then.
Yeah, I mean, you want to look back on it and I'd say well, there has to be some kind of correlation between that happening and sort of me ending up where I am now. I think it certainly opened the door to like, this is kind of fun. This is kind of cool. Yeah, I think it was crazy to me, the fact that I'd been reached out to and someone's like, hey, I'll buy you a copy of Black Ops 2 if you want to cast this game. And then here's a roster where you've got like 10 different casters. Obviously things were very different back then, right? We're not sort of like, and they're going to be jumping into blah, blah, blah. It was very much like, hey mate, do you want to jump in for 10 minutes and talk about, rounds 4 and 5 on Search and Destroy or whatever it would have been. But I think, it was wild to me that somebody was like, I will literally buy you this $80, $90 game, and all you need to do is just talk into a microphone on a Tuesday night, and you think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm getting paid. Like
I'm basically getting paid. Like those are your exposure bucks, but like it felt real.
Yeah. It was different back then as well. Like literally no one in Australia was getting paid to
you
do
were
it,
literally doing it out of passion, which I
Just
think
for
is a good place to start. I think it's very hard now, right, where you do have to go through that whole exposure ring, but you wonder how long is this going to last until you make that break, and for some people it doesn't, right?
The knowledge that there is a light at the end of the tunnel might actually be a negative.
Yeah.
When we're talking about that in that context. But anyway, we don't need to go into that too much, I don't think. I think the next thing that I actually want to touch on here with you, and this is like obviously jumping forward a few years, but it's probably, I would say, like one of the more influential points of your career would have been picking up Heroes of the Storm. Because obviously, as we know, and as we'll discuss, you went on to be a pro for, a brief period of time. And that was kind of what really kickstarted your casting career as well. So the first question I have in regard to that is like, what actually drew you to Heroes of the Storm? Because at that point in time, I think League had been out for 5 years and Dota had been out for 3 or something like that. Both those games were already obviously very well established when HOTS came out. So was it just that you had not picked up either of those games and like the point of entry was maybe a little bit too high, or were you already playing those games? You made a transition, or?
I think for me it was the perfect storm because, as I said, like we had a big group of friends that would play games and we'd go through the motions. Right, I certainly have played League before. I played League season 1 to 3, I want to say, before I fell off and started to try other things. We did Heroes of New Earth, we did Dota 1, a whole bunch. I think what was the selling point for me with Heroes of the Storm was the fact that I played a lot of WoW as well, a lot of World of Warcraft, and that literally just felt like the best of League and the best of WoW combined into one game. So these are all the characters that I know. It's got a whole bunch of different maps, and there's variation in that, and like, oh, this is cool, I get to play as Illidan or Diablo or whatever it may be.
So I guess that's like almost the transition that a lot of like maybe League players had going into TFT, for example.
Sure.
Instead of maybe going into Auto Chess, I think, which is the Dota 2 or Dota 2 Underlords. That's the one.
Yep.
Like Dota 2 Underlords came out before TFT, but I know like none of the people I knew playing League played Dota 2 Underlords.
Yeah.
And then obviously heaps of people picked up TFT. So I guess that's maybe the same kind of thing.
I would say so. I think it's just like the sort of perfect mix of like, you've already played these other games, so you're already curious if like, well, I know what it's like to play it in this kind of context. So what would it be like when, I like MOBAs, they're fun, but like I can actually play as a proper healer or as a proper tank or whatever it may be.
What were you actually doing at that time in your life? Because I saw one of your tweets, which was a video where you were playing, like it almost looked like you had like a LAN party set up in a garage. And I don't know if was that like an ordinary day or was that like a one-off thing? Did you have these LAN parties all the time?
Yeah,
no.
That's
you're like, this is my housemate's setup, and you were like going around the garage.
Yes,
like,
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, no, that was the last place I lived in before I moved over here. Yeah, bunch of really close mates, fantastic people. And we just sort of decided that let's just make the garage where we play our games, which is always funny because when it came to winter, it was this almost like ego battle between the boys as to who would cave in first and decide to move their computer back into the house, back into the home, right? Where there's obviously warmth and whatnot. So there'd be those that are very stubborn that would have like blankets on, big jackets, and be like, I'm not moving out, mate. Like, nah, I'm staying here. But yeah, we basically made that like our little LAN center. I ended up moving out my computer from there because I was having to cast, and one of my friends in there was actually a pro player at the same time. So I thought, well, the garage is obviously far too echoey, so I had to move it into my bedroom, right, to try and soundproof it to a degree.
Yeah.
Which, to my flatmates' dismay, at times wasn't the best time because definitely if you're screaming and shouting, they'd be quite keen to be like, shut up, and fairly right so. Yeah, no, that was definitely the regular setup. We had that in multiple different flats. It was basically that kind of core squad of people.
So how long did this like playing career? Is it even fair to call it a pro career? Like, was it pro? Were you really like actually qualifying for stuff? You were signed to XL5 at one point.
Yeah.
But how long did that sort of last for? Was there anything really to that, or was it just like again those sort of early stages of esports where you could just get into a team and be considered a pro? Because it seemed like, at least based on the info that I could pull, like you were sort of a pro player for a little bit, but very quickly it sort of transitioned into casting. Yeah,
I mean, we basically had the equivalent of what the OPL had, right? Where if you won, then you'd get a spot to go overseas to represent your region. We basically had the same. I know we'd won a bunch of amateur tournaments. We'd won a bunch of tournaments before Blizzard really started to implement those kind of structures in place, which is when XL5 reached out to us. And back then it was a case of like, here's what we can offer you. You've got to meet these kind of bonuses for us to then obviously activate so-and-so. So it would have been like, we can offer you a Razer mouse, or we can offer you, a HyperX keyboard, or whatever it would be. And you're thinking, how cool is this, boys? Like, we're going to get like free peripherals. But any kind of bonus monetary-wise or anything else was all like, well, if you qualify for this tournament or you place in this position, and we can offer you X, Y, and Z. And yeah, like we never managed to make it to those big events. I know we'd beaten Team Immunity in the upper bracket, sent them down. They'd done the entire lower bracket and swept us in the grand finals. And even there was a time when we were having to play tournaments against Southeast Asia, which is quite similar to, I guess, what's happening now in LCO. But we were actually aiming to play from here, so we had like 150, 200 ping. Yeah. And then you had to chop and change who was the lobby host. So one game you'd have, host privilege. The next game it'd be Southeast Asia. So you'd have to like try and adjust your draft and be like, what can we get away with that would work on like 200 ping? And yeah, I mean, I probably studied more for that than I did for like uni, quite honestly, because I would have copious amounts of spreadsheets. Here's all the drafts. Here's all the mock drafts. Here's all the picks and bans. Here's what's strong on this on this meta. And I know me and my friend who were in the team together, we're always kicking ourselves because we were in I want to say it was like game 5. It was our ping. And we forgot to ban this particular champion, which we'd explicitly wrote down in our notes, ban this and we'll win. They pick it, they smash us with it, and we're like spewing about it, right? So I remember getting to a bit of a point where I was thinking, this is really enjoyable, this is really, really fun. I don't want to give it up, but like realistically, if you're coming second, you're nothing, right? You're not earning the money, you're not getting the benefits from it, so you're better off just getting a 9 to 5.
Especially back then, right?
Absolutely.
Like, nowadays, maybe depending on the game you're playing,
Absolutely.
if you're a top 2, you could, like for example, League right now, or recently you could maybe at least go over to PCS and compete for a spot, or even in CS, there's multiple spots for a lot of these tournaments at the moment. But certainly back then it was like 1 or nothing. And I assume, probably weren't getting a salary, if anything, at that point in time. So, like, when did that transition to casting actually happen? Because I think, again, I was looking at it, and by about, 2016, it seemed like you'd really quite fully transitioned into casting, and there was a couple of things going on there for you. So, was it just because, basically, there was, like, no prospects for you as a player at the time?
Well, I think I had a bit of an honest conversation with myself, and it's like, can I keep this up? And does it really give me... Does it really sustain me, I suppose, is the answer. Because I'm living at home with parents. Obviously, they want you to be self-sufficient. They want you to, feel like you've made that next stage of, like, you've gone from high school. Now you're starting to become an adult and, make a livable wage and all the rest of it. And I think I just basically told myself, like, nah, like this isn't going to get me to where I need to be. It was fun. I gave it a crack. And I'm glad I gave it a chance. But I need to move on. But I was quite lost for a bit of time. I felt a bit depressed, and I remember doing this thing called Outward Bound, this big course where I spent like a week away from home. No technology, nothing. It was just like all this outdoors activities. I probably felt the best I've ever had in my life. Right, the mental clarity of just you're hanging out with these people, and we're all sort of sharing this alignment of where. Not the David Goggins, like who's going to carry the boats and all the rest of it, right? But like, you're kayaking, you're mountain climbing, you're doing all the rest of this, and you're thinking this is exciting. So I came back and you sort of had this whole like clear vision of mental clarity. Okay, this is what I need to do. So it was as simple as I'm going to enroll in university. I'm going to go study computer science. I'm going to keep the computer aspect of passion alive. Maybe I work in game design, or maybe I sort of work in programming, whatever it may be. And I was very clear, that is what I want to do for about 3 or 4 months. And then I randomly got like a DM saying, hey, would you like to come on to the show to just be a guest, just talk? Obviously you're no longer playing as a pro anymore, but would love to have your perspective. And you think, oh, nah, I'm good. No, I'm sort of, that's behind me now. But they're very persistent. And that persistence eventually worked out, and they sort of got me on. And I think it was just, like share a few yarns, much like you'd have your classic analyst desk nowadays. Or what did you think about that game? Or I'd like to see them change up X, Y, Z. And that was it. And then it sort of reached a point where that would happen more and more frequently, and you're finding more and more enjoyment out of this thing. Oh, I could probably do this on the side. It's only once a week and a night, couple of hours. That's not much of an investment to make. Until I got to a point where like, I actually really enjoy getting into this. So I'm doing actively, I'm like studying, I'm talking to the players, getting behind the scenes scrim data, yada yada yada. I'd actually like to be a caster, right? Which is instead of being in the analyst desk now, they're saying, we're going to partner you along somebody, and you can just sort of talk shop during the game. So that's when I certainly started to find a lot more enjoyment out of it, and think, okay, what can we do with this? Yeah.
So I mean, it very quickly seemed like it went from doing that and doing some online stuff to actually then doing some fairly serious shows, right? With regard to, I assume what was the first point where you kind of got flown over to Sydney? Because again, in 2016, it seemed like you were, I think in May maybe, and then in September again, over into the ESL studios. And obviously I was working at ESL at the time. I remember there was like, fairly regularly Heroes of the Storm events down in that Auburn studio. And, they seemed like fairly big kind of things, and you'd have all the players on the stage and you have the casters and stuff like that. So was that a bit of like an awakening moment for you? Because I think whenever a caster goes from doing bedroom casts to going to studio, that's a bit of it's a bit of a jump, right? That's like a fairly decent milestone in your career. So
sure.
Did you sort of have any sort of thoughts around that first time you got the call to say, hey, why don't you come over from New Zealand to Sydney to do this?
I don't know if I'd ever had considered it much more than just like a one-off. Like, it's kind of cool. Like, I get to still work on uni, and I get to still keep this dream alive, and sort of reattach myself in a very different position. I know. So what had happened is me and a friend that were flying together at the time. They played the game a whole bunch as well, and we kind of approached games. So it was like a package of like, hey, he'll be the play-by-play, I'll be the analyst, because there was a bunch of us casting. But it's always different when you're casting with your mate as it is to casting with some Joe Public online. And I think the advantage we presented was like we can do very much like your setup here. Is we can have our camera, we can basically be in LAN together, which is unmatched.
Yep.
So there is no delay. Everything is authentic. We know each other. So I think the viewers really, really grew to appreciate that kind of partnership. And that went on and on and on for a bit of time. And I think people were sort of like, oh, these are the casters. They're the premier casters. And we're sort of expecting, okay, if there's a tournament, we're going to get flown over. But they'd broken it up in a way where it's like, oh, we can only bring one of you at a time. And I remember they'd approached and said, oh, we can bring you over for this one, Skimmy, but then for split 2, we'll bring your friend. But my friend had taken it in the wrong way, wasn't too happy about the sort of news. And for whatever reason, just decided, I'm throwing in the towel. Like, almost felt like they'd been insulted, I suppose, right? So that kind of upset me even to this day, because I'm like, oh, imagine what could have been. Like, we could have risen to the top together. But I remember, the head honcho at Blizzard at the time was like, hey, I think your energy is much more suited for being a play-by-play as opposed to an analyst. Like because with Heroes of the Storm casting, it's very different to League, because League casting is very rigid. You are the play-by-play, you're the analyst. You stick in your lane, you do your thing. These are what we expect you to do, like the closing moments or like the replay moments, right? Whereas with Heroes of the Storm, it was very fluid. You could just do whatever. Like, somebody could just jump in and call the shots. Like there was a time I was casting with Vandy as well, and it would be quite common that, she would go into analyst work and then I would just jump straight out of analyst into analyst myself. So it was quite fun in that regard. But yeah, the head honcho at Blizzard was like, I want you to be play-by-play. And then sort of from that point onwards, I just got to be unleashed and be crazy. And
probably a good shout from whoever that was at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that was maybe just maybe a sign of the times as well? Like back then, it sort of felt like it wasn't as rigid. Like people just sort of, it was like, oh, we're just going to put people on the thing, and as long as they can talk okay, they're going to be okay. It wasn't. I don't really recall. I mean, I guess maybe by 2016, 2017, like those kinds of conversations had started to happen, but yeah, maybe it was just, were you still sort of learning the mechanics of casting and stuff like that at the time?
Oh, for sure. I had no idea. I mean, this is the one thing I find, even to this day, I find fascinating about casting. There's nobody that you have that's coaching you. There's nobody giving you feedback. This is all self-taught. This is all, this is all you being your own worst enemy, right? You're watching back the VODs and you're going, that didn't really hit the mark. I don't like that. And that's the only feedback you'll get, right? Because I don't know where it stems from, but like, it's not like a respect thing, but who do you approach to say, critique me? Like, who do you approach?
It's hard, right? Because either you're going to your colleague who's like on the same level as you and also is your competition, or the people who are normally directly above you that you're like directly reporting to are not casters for the most part.
Exactly right. So it's like, it's very difficult to figure out, am I doing a good enough job? And really it got to a point where you're thinking, well, I'm still working. I'm still here on the show.
Must be doing something right.
Yeah. So, I would say that definitely everything was very much a learn on the job case. And it was just a case of, I really enjoy what I'm talking about. I really enjoy this game. So I think it just naturally conveyed it. Even if it was right or wrong, people could say, like, they know what they're talking about. They like what they're talking about. So we're keen to listen. We're keen to engage in that.
Yeah, and it kind of continues to go from strength to strength for you as an individual. So I want to jump forward again to 2017. And the first tweet I think that you made in 2017, January 4th, was 2017 casting goals to go to an international event. And mate, this tweet popped off at the time. It got 1 retweet and 5 likes.
Yes, so bro. Yes.
Huge.
Yes.
Huge back in the day. But the reason I bring it up was obviously, as we know, you ended up going overseas that year. So it was just something that, was kind of quite cool to see, right? That you're sort of kicking those goals pretty early on in the piece. Before we do actually talk about that international trip, the one thing else that I sort of dug up was that, there was conversations on the Twitter sphere at the time about, dead game, blah, 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 this and that. And like, I know every game gets that.
It does, yeah.
But obviously with the knowledge of what ended up happening to Heroes of the Storm at the time, I kind of just wanted to know what it was actually like, what the scene actually was like in ANZ at the time. Was it actually legitimately like decent, or was it always kind of almost on life support, if that makes sense?
It definitely had its moments. I know they relaunched the game. They relaunched the game at one stage because the game had basically come out in an alpha and they tried to rush it because the whole premise was like, well, we wanted this game to be out donkeys years ago, and League and Dota have beaten us to it, right? So they're really struggling to get a foothold in the market. I think they weren't quite happy that they were sitting in third. It wasn't enough for them, right? Like, almost like a smite in a way.
Blizzard doesn't want to be third, do they?
Like, they've got to be the premier game or nothing. It was very much like do or die. But yeah, I think they were very much relying on like the strength of their IPs, right? The Warcraft, Starcraft, Diablo universe is all carrying on through, and obviously then Overwatch comes on through. Overwatch characters get introduced to the game. Oh, that's even more.
Yeah, I think that's where I first remember like really seeing Heroes of the Storm, because like obviously I knew that the game existed, but I remember when Tracer got put into the game.
Yeah.
Everyone was like, "Oh, Tracer's in Heroes. Let's try it out." I never really tried it out.
And it's all the quests, right? Between all the games, like you play a game of Overwatch, get a skin character or whatever it might be in here.
Yeah.
Heroes of the Storm, or play Heroes of the Storm.
Makes sense in
get
hindsight.
a mountain WoW. Do you know what I mean?
I almost can't believe that it did fail with that in mind, because like obviously they would have had a huge WoW audience. They would have had the Overwatch audience that they may have been able to port over, and I mean people from Warcraft and whatever else other IPs they had. Yeah, it's kind of surprising that it didn't work out.
Well, it definitely was a lot of players. Like I know there was a lot of League players that came across that would just pick up the game.
I saw Minky
yeah,
Whale
Minky,
doing something at one point.
There's a whole bunch of people.
What's he doing there?
Absolutely, there's a whole bunch of people that just came across and were like, "Well, we've got the mechanics. I'm sure we can pick up these characters in like 10 minutes, right?" So.
Yeah.
You would see that there'd be teams that were just like 5 League of Legends players, and they would smash you because they would understand macro, right? They might understand the characters and what they can do, or like the map itself might be like, collect these gold coins to activate like the pirate cannon to try and destroy your base. They might be like, what's this? Like, that makes no sense. But in terms of pushing waves, freezing waves, crashing, all that kind of fundamentals that you look at in League that makes a good team as strong as they are, they were so on top of that, right? So there was definitely a big boom at first, but... and as it was for the time, right, you win a tournament, you'd get like a skin code. Like here, you've got a champion now that wears like a fancy axe. Grats.
Sweet.
Right? So like I think the incentive to stick around was definitely quite low in comparison to if you're looking at like League, if you were like a top dog, right? You're getting on a good team, you're going to go overseas to clashes.
Especially with OPL at the time.
So definitely it was fighting an uphill battle. But I think, that was probably their pride. The fact that they weren't top dog is in that category that they pull the plug.
Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, I mean, look, let's turn the discussion to some more positive times, because huge opportunity, obviously, for you is to go overseas, right? Any caster in ANZ, I think any player, anyone really involved in esports in ANZ, it's almost like the end goal is to work overseas in some way, shape, or form.
You make it.
Yeah, you feel like you made it. Whether you like AU esports, ANZ esports is almost like a training ground, and then you've had your practice time, and then when you go overseas, it's like, okay, now I get to do what I feel like I've trained for, right?
Sure.
It's almost a completely different world, and you sort of just get thrust into it and hope that you either sink or swim in that case. And I think you obviously swam, knowing how things ended up going for your Heroes of the Storm career. But talk to me about going over. It was Ukraine that you went to first,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
So how did this opportunity come? Because I recall at the time there was like a lot of Heroes casters in ANZ, and it's sort of the same thing that happened with maybe your friend in New Zealand. It's like there's one spot, right? So how does it go to Skimmy? Like, why was it you? Were you the best, or were you the most well connected, or like where does this sort of opportunity even come from? You know what I mean?
Yeah, well,
someone has to make that choice.
Yeah, well, I know there was definitely a few people at Blizzard that would then be... So, for example, if I fly over to Sydney for the finals and I'm just screaming my heart out, you can just see the raw emotion and passion I'm doing. I know that some of the Blizzard employees would just be standing not too far behind watching you, and sort of they would compliment you as you come off, like, oh, I love that, mate. Like, you made that game so exciting, yada, yada. And you think, oh, cool. So, like... I think there's definitely a degree of, them fighting in your corner for you, having seen you in person, which is going to be that privilege compared to those that didn't get the call up and really only have those online casts to rely upon. So I'm very grateful for them fighting to try and get your name out there. Obviously getting that initial email like, hey, we'd like to get you across. You're thinking it's a spam. Like, there's no way. This can't be real, right? And this tournament was called the Western Clash, which is essentially like all the Western teams would then fly over to a certain location. So you'd have, Australia, America, and Europe all fighting out of one corner. And it was a really cool event. It was a really, really cool event. Obviously, very fresh face, had no idea what I was doing. Had to go out and buy a suit. Had to, figure out how to get myself sorted for all these flights and all the rest of it. And I just remember there's a very funny photo. I think I have it saved on my phone somewhere where I've arrived at this Ukrainian airport, and it's been like 40 hours non-stop flying, right? Like you've taken New Zealand to somewhere, from there to Turkey, from there to Germany to somewhere else, right? And you're thinking, this is all in one sitting.
Yep.
And you've arrived, and they've taken this photo of like your Ukrainian visa as you've landed, and you're just like totally drained of any emotion. You look like you're drugged up, basically. You're just so far gone. And then you had like the American casters, oh yeah, man, 14-hour flight. Oh, it's been so tough. And you're just sort of sitting there like, don't talk, eh?
Yeah, don't even
talk to me right now. So
I've had that experience many times.
Yeah,
like, man, this 7-hour flight, it sucked. I had to sit on the plane for 7 hours. I'm like, mate, that's not even like half my journey. You know what I mean?
I should be getting paid to sit on this plane for 40 hours, mate. Far out. So
it's 2 travel days.
It's
really.
gone.
Yeah.
So no, it was very exciting, but obviously very crazy because I'm still so young at the time. I think I was the youngest on the casting roster then. And they were very much like very fixed in place, right? You've got like your Premier American and Premier European casters, very much like you have in like League for they will be guaranteed to go to Worlds, they will be guaranteed to go to MSI. So you had that kind of fixed roster. But I was just luckily enough able to go. I guess it would have been a case of, we can afford to get like with your categories like your S tier, A tier, B tier caster, we can afford to get this B tier caster on a slightly lower rate, give them a crack, give them a try. They can represent Australia for their region. And let's see if they do well. If they do, then maybe we keep them around.
Yeah, get that regional hire in. And it turns out, I mean, at least it seems like you did pretty well because you got invited back again to go overseas later on in the year, sometime in like October, November.
That was the biggest shock.
Was that the World Finals that year or something like that?
Yeah, so that was the Blizzcon itself, the big culmination. And I think even the casters that I was working with were very surprised, thinking, I don't know if he's like deserved it. Like, I think there's a lot of conflict over, why is this guy getting sort of like funneled all this attention? I know I'd done a really good job because there was like Reddit threads made about me from that Ukrainian one, of people saying like, who's this Australian caster? Obviously no one knows who New Zealand is, right? They have no idea. Yeah. So they were like, oh, who's this Australian caster? He sounds so different. He sounds so cool. Because back then, so the thing that's like changed about me is as I've grown older as a caster, I've almost like tried to fit a mold. Like nowadays I try to be a lot more professional. Yeah. Whereas back then when I'm doing like the Heroes of the Storm casting, I'm just dropping jokes left, right and center, like almost like comic relief. Yeah. But you tried to find like that right boundary of like it's too much and you actually know what you're talking about. But I was just dropping like, oh, this guy's hopped in the Uber and he's flown across him and yada yada yada, and people, oh, what's he saying? Like that's so funny. And like dropping all the euphemisms, right? Like, oh, you do get that on the big job and all that kind of stuff. So people just found it hilarious and just got a lot of great traction. And I think honestly, like the Reddit bandwagon kind of carried me across, almost swayed Blizzard's decision to take me to BlizzCon. Because rocking up to that event, there was definitely a few eyes of like, why is he here? Yeah. But at the same time, you're thinking, no, like this is sick. This is like the biggest glow up you could. I mean, if it ended there, I would have been happy. Yep. Yeah. You could die happy at that point. Yeah. I mean, going to BlizzCon, right? As someone who has been, as you said, like a bit of a Blizzard fanboy, basically. You started playing Warcraft 3 and you were playing WoW. I know you're still into WoW to this day. Yeah. So surely going to BlizzCon is like, I'm not a Blizzard guy. Like I've played a bit of Overwatch and, stuff like that, but I've never been into WoW or anything like that. But the way that people talk about BlizzCon, it's almost like a rite of passage or a pilgrimage or something like that for people who enjoy Blizzard games. So was it like that for you? Was that like a big moment, or were you just sort of like a bit more focused on doing your job? Was it a big deal to be actually going? Did you even go to BlizzCon, or was it just... Well, I did go to BlizzCon, yeah.
You weren't like working that BlizzCon portion, or you worked on the desk or something?
Yeah, I worked on the desk. I didn't get to cast at that BlizzCon, but I got to go on the desk and we had to do like replays and all the rest of it, right? So as the game's happening, I had to run out the back speaker, replay operator, do this. Then you had like one of those like big screens where you could draw on, and the whole audience is then like looking at what you're doing. Yeah. That in itself was enough for me. I think anything more, I'd have probably choked. Probably would have really given up. Would have been too much. But in terms of the event itself, it was hard for me to really do too much because you have such a tight schedule. There's like rehearsals and you're sort of sitting backstage the entire time watching the games, so you know what to talk about. We had a little bit of time to explore the expo. I remember going to see like the Overwatch League or the Overwatch World Cup or whatever it would have been in one of the expo halls. You got to like try out some of the new game announcements. So you got to like play like the new WoW expansion, or you get to like hang out at like the Hearthstone Tavern or whatever it been. And like that was definitely cool. It was very, really exciting. It was a sick experience. I think it's probably a very different experience working it compared to just going for that sole purpose. Yeah. Like it wasn't bad at all. Like I really enjoyed it. And it was kind of crazy because you just get to flash your badge and you just get like a shortcut and straight in because like, oh, you're a talent. Okay, cool. Like you don't have time to wait in a queue for like 1 hour. Yeah. But I think definitely doing it on my own. I think if I'd gone with friends, would have been a different experience. Yeah. On your own, you kind of like you've got all these like pseudo relationships of like, yeah, we cast once every year. Like we're best friends. But it's
very much a working relationship where you're still kind of like a little bit not on edge necessarily, but you're trying to guard showing too much.
You don't want to say the wrong thing.
You don't want to be too keen. You don't want to say something weird. You don't want to like piss off the wrong person.
Absolutely.
So you're kind of just like, I'm at maybe like 50 to 75% of what I normally am. And I'm just trying to like get through this. And
I'm just trying to figure this all out because this is insane. Like, I
Yeah.
would never imagine me just talking into a microphone in my bedroom would result in me suddenly like talking in front of like 10,000 people, right?
and now you're talking in a microphone in my bedroom.
In your bedroom,
wow.
hey.
What a
Full
glow up.
circle.
Hey guys, just at the end of this video, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Jean, who is my first supporter on buymeacoffee.com. If you'd also like to support me financially or any of my content, make sure to check out the link. It is in the description box below.